Hello and welcome to the Metaverse, Build It and They Shall Come panel discussion, brought to you by CODEX TV and broadcast on Wednesday, 16th of February. I'm Rakesh Rao, CEO of CODEX and your host for today. Before we get going, please remember to click the subscribe button at the bottom right of the screen and the bell icon, and this will ensure you never miss an event on CODEX TV. I'm sure you will agree there's been a lot of talk recently about the Metaverse, a kind of 3D version of today's internet, which users will perhaps work, learn, play, and even shop in immersive virtual worlds. Could it be the next big thing? Well, let's find out. As you can see, in true CODEX style, we have a very distinguished panel of speakers, all of whom are at the top of their game in their respective fields. Our panelists today are Rev Laboridian, Vice President, Omniverse and Simulation Technology at Nvidia, probably one of the most important companies in the world right now. David Chalmers, author of Reality Plus, Virtual Worlds and the Problems of Philosophy, a must-read book for anyone interested in the metaverse and virtual worlds. And David is also a professor at NYU. This book has just recently been published on the 25th of January, and I strongly recommend you read this. And keeping the British end up, Andrew Douthwaite, Chief Commercial Officer at Doobit, one of the leading UK games companies. And Doobit has just launched the Metaverse Gaming League, the first esports tournament across the metaverse. If you're looking for more detailed speaker bios, they can all be viewed at our website, codex.com. Time is very limited today, so let's get straight into the discussion. So the metaverse is not really a new concept, but it's certainly a new term that people are talking about, especially since October, November last year. So let's discuss what is the metaverse. So over to you, David.
Yeah, well, the term metaverse actually got started in a science fiction novel by Neil Stephenson in 1992. This one, Snow Crash. In Snow Crash, the metaverse was a single virtual world, an online virtual world that people would don maybe a headset and a bodysuit, and they would enter this virtual world. It would be a world which, although fully digital, people could socialize, people could work, people could build relationships and communities, have adventures. So for a long time, the word metaverse was used for something like single virtual platforms that one interacts with via virtual reality technology. I would say that now, since October, a rebranding though has been going on for a while, and since October, Mark Zuckerberg has managed to really rebrand the concept significantly. So it no longer refers to something like a single platform or a single virtual world. It now refers to something much more global, like a network of virtual worlds, something like a successor to the internet. People sometimes use the term immersive internet, which I like. It's analogous to the internet, but it's experienced immersively, from the inside, three-dimensionally around you, using virtual reality technology, headsets like this one, the Oculus Quest headset, or successors like augmented reality glasses. That's how I understand the metaverse.
Andrew, what's your understanding of what is the metaverse?
Yeah, I think for me, it's important to define what it isn't as well. It's not a specific technology or a specific company. It's a lot of different technologies converging together to allow for more immersive online communication and participation. So I think we're seeing that with some platforms that are emerging like Roblox, where lots of young people are gathering together to socialize, play games together, and they're able to do that in these massively immersive large spaces. And I think that the different technologies that are being worked on at the moment, and they're starting to emerge, certainly around blockchain and virtual reality and augmented reality, are going to contribute to ways in which we can spend time more effectively and more immersively, online. So I think there's a mix of a technological shift to this space where we can interact better online, and we can do that across different pieces of hardware. It's not that we're all going to be sat with VR headsets on. I think, ideally you want to be interacting in as many accessible ways as possible. But also, I quite like the view of looking at it as a sort of space in time, or a place in the future where we care more about, we spend more time online, and we therefore perhaps spend more money on investing in digital items and caring about our appearance online as we have a persistent avatar that moves across various different 3D worlds. But I think the way of looking at it as a successor state to the internet is strong, and a good way to think about it, comparing it to today's web. But generally, this idea of having 3D worlds that we interact within is an easy way of us understanding it. And we're already seeing aspects of that, like I said, with Roblox and other gaming platforms, which are largely driving it. But then there's also this other shift around Web 2 to Web 3, where we're looking at decentralized technologies, allowing for more ownership from users and more participation and incentives with that. So I think that in an ideal world, an idealistic world, we're looking at the metaverse as being a place where there's lots of decentralized platforms that we can interact and move between. But in reality, the big tech firms are obviously investing heavily into the space. You only have to look at the rebrand of Facebook to Meta to see that. So it's a question of what it looks like in the future, and I'm not entirely sure what that is, and it's changing all the time. But certainly, looking at it from a point of view of where we spend our time and what we do in there, it's certainly been revolving around gaming and live events online in a place using lots of different technologies.
And Rev, and what does the metaverse, or as you guys would say, the omniverse, mean to Nvidia?
Well, I have to disagree a little bit with David. I'm not quite certain yet that the metaverse has been redefined by any entity. I think if you look back at the beginnings of the World Wide Web and when the internet became mainstream and popular, there are lots of terms flying around for the internet, information superhighway and whatnot. And even before Neil Stephenson coined the term metaverse, the same concepts existed in science fiction almost 10 years prior. And William Gibson wrote a set of short stories and in a book called Neuromancer, where he defined the terms matrix and cyberspace. Some of those terms are still used and some are not. I think it's kind of a fool's errand to predict how fashion and culture will adopt these terms and talk about them. But what we can talk about is the set of technologies and the things that are converging that are forming this next thing that's happening, this evolution of what we already have into a spatial experience that's something more like what mankind has evolved to experience. We've evolved over millions of years and eventually hundreds of thousands of years, in human civilization to communicate and interact with our world and with each other using a combination of all of our senses and many channels of communication. With the internet, we got this awesome superpower where basically every person on Earth can communicate with every other person on Earth, but the channels of communication are pretty limited. We can only communicate by, very low bandwidth, low fidelity methods. Nothing like being in the same room together, where we can use everything that's in the human experience to communicate. So I think what we're doing here with this metaverse thing that's evolving is taking all of the things that are great about the real world and how humans have interacted with each other, and overlaying that on top of this infrastructure we built to connect all of mankind together. And that opens up a lot of really new and amazing possibilities, because in the real world, there's some physical constraints that we just can't get past. You can't teleport. You can't do all the magical things we can do inside these virtual worlds. But the combination of the two, I think is going to be really profound. And what we're talking about here is not a particular technology. I completely agree with Andrew on that. It's not about VR headsets. It's not about AR glasses or whatnot. It's about applying the full wealth, richness of the human experience inside a spatial world to the internet and how we communicate together. And we're going to be doing a lot of things in there. not just playing games and entertaining each other. We're going to be working in there. We're going to be building things. We're going to be doing all of the things we do in the real world and then some inside this place.
And on that point, can we have meaningful and satisfying experiences in VR? And to what extent is virtual reality genuine reality? David?
Yeah, I think that virtual reality is going to be increasingly continuous with physical reality. I mean, right now, virtual reality and virtual worlds, the space is largely dominated by games. And games are amazing. The video game companies have been real pioneers in the metaverse, but still, games are a relatively limited form of life. You might see it as somewhat escapist and as a form of entertainment, but I think increasingly virtual worlds will become not just forms of entertainment, but places where people go to live their lives. I mean, live parts of their lives. We've already seen this to some extent with virtual worlds like Second Life, which has been around for almost a couple of decades now. People will go in there and actually they'll work, they'll build communities, they'll build relationships, they'll make friends, and so on, do many of the things that actually happen in physical reality. And some people would view this still as a form of escapism, but I think at that point it just becomes implausible to view it that way. It becomes continuous with physical reality. Those relationships you're building inside a virtual world can be just as real as the relationships you'll build in the physical world. The work you do, the projects you have in a virtual world can be just as real. So yeah, Rev mentioned Gibson, who back in 1982 coined the term cyberspace, really for something like virtual reality or the metaverse as we're now understanding it. But he said cyberspace was a consensual hallucination, as if it's not real. I think it's not quite the right way to think about it. I don't think it's a hallucination. I think the metaverse will be a real digital world that we're interacting with, nothing hallucinatory about it. It'll just be a new form of reality.
And Andrew, what sort of meaningful experiences are you creating at Doobit? And how do you measure the level of satisfaction, if you like, amongst the people who are using or entering your virtual worlds?
I think that certainly what we're doing at Dubbit around VR and Roblox and some of these immersive worlds is all about creating spaces for people to play, to be entertained, to enjoy experiences and try things that perhaps they couldn't do in the real world. For example, I see a huge opportunity with VR for accessibility and trying things you cannot usually access in the real world. I think that in terms of meaningful experiences in VR, there are meaningful experiences happening and trying things that you couldn't usually experience using things like some of the cameras being used to replicate things in real life for people perhaps in wheelchairs, for example. But I think generally, VR at the moment is very much a tool for more immersive gaming at the moment. I think that's been the case for the last 5 years. And I think that we're getting to the point where Meta are trying to push people towards a more social experience, which I think is the way it could go, in terms of having a more immersive social experience and doing things like collaborate with work and with social. But for me, it's not quite there yet, and I think it's a little bit chicken and egg with VR. I think that we need to have mass appeal to more people, and at the moment it's very, very siloed to gamers, whereas you also need more people to have the headsets to be involved in the social experiences. So it's a little bit of a crossroads to me. But I do think there's lots of great use cases for VR, outside of gaming, and we're seeing a lot with therapeutic measures, exposure therapy, and even helping people with phantom limb disorder, as an example. So I think there are meaningful experiences to be had that aren't just meaningful, but are actually life-changing. So as a technology, I think it's brilliant. The big question has been, and will hang over VR for the next, certainly the next year, is going mainstream and appealing to a wider audience. And I think that does work benefit from more immersion and a VR experience? Maybe. I'm not totally sure on that. I think that socially certainly does, if you get the right level of immersion with technologies that fall alongside VR, like haptics and various other things that can make it feel like you're there. But it's very much dependent on the application, and certainly shared experiences can be meaningful. Visiting somewhere with a loved one or with someone else in VR could be fun. People are getting married in VR, so I think that there's certainly a lot of interesting things, and I've been playing around with VR for the past 6 years or so, maybe 7 years, and seeing how it's changed. But it's still very much a tool at the moment for more immersive gaming experiences. And aside from that, there's not quite enough users for it to be meaningful socially, I don't think yet. But I have seen weird examples like putting VR on cows in Russia and seeing them be more productive in terms of producing more quality and quantity of milk. So, who knows?
And Rev, my understanding is that at Nvidia, the Omniverse is very much a collaborative tool for engineers, designers, and creators. Perhaps you could discuss more about this sort of experiences and what they can do using these tools.
Yeah, so we look at what's happening here with the metaverse and virtual reality and Web3 and all of these things as essentially taking all of the technologies, all of the advances we've made in the previous 3 decades in computer graphics, in physics simulation, and now in AI, kind of fusing them together to give us the experience of new digital worlds that potentially don't exist at all. They're completely virtual, or in some ways, more interestingly, giving us different views into the world that does exist. We often talk about virtual reality and games and these places as like fantasy places, and the things that we're going to be simulating, the worlds we're going to be creating as some other place. But increasingly, we're ingesting our real world into a digital form. And by combining that with these same technologies, we now gain a few superpowers. So for one, you can teleport. We can already kind of do that with Google Earth. We have bits of the world kind of scanned in from satellites and Street View and all of that. And so you can kind of experience it in a limited form. But it won't be long now till we have every factory, your home, any place that matters to us, essentially replicated in real time in a digital twin version of it inside this metaverse, or whatever we end up calling it. Once you have that, and you have this link between the real world and the virtual world, you can effectively have godlike powers. You can transport to anywhere. And if you have the ability to record the state of the world over time, then you get a kind of form of time travel into the past. You can go teleport to any position and kind of scrub the time back and go see what happened there at some point in the past. But if we can also do a physics simulation that's accurate, if we know the rules of the world well enough, then we can potentially predict the future as well. So we can have a time machine that takes us into the future. This has real practical applications. So if you have a factory that's building cars, we've shown with Omniverse our vision of the factory of the future. You can build a simulation of the factory. You can set up the initial conditions of this factory. You can ingest the state of that factory, of every conveyor belt and robot and human in there. And you can potentially start making predictions about what's going to happen. And if you can do that and do that well enough so that we have confidence in the predictions, then you can start exploring alternate futures and choose the one that's best for your particular problem. What we're building with Omniverse is the foundation for that, the foundational technologies. All this stuff I just described is theoretically possible, and we believe we're getting closer and closer to it. And depending on the kinds of simulations we're talking about, we're either there or there's still a lot of work to do. But all of it requires a lot of computation. You're not going to be able to do this with your a mobile processor or a gaming console. This requires supercomputers. And so what we're building with Omniverse is the foundation to do this kind of supercomputing for simulating virtual worlds at extremely high fidelity and with a real-time connection to the real world. so we can have digital twins of the things that are actually around us. Once we have those tools, I think the possibilities are limitless. I mean, what couldn't you do with a teleportation machine and a time machine combined? That's essentially what we're building.
That's very interesting indeed, actually. What I'd like to move on to next is what the panelists think will be the metaverse's first killer apps, and which business models are likely to succeed. Andrew.
In terms of killer apps, there's always the question that always pops up when a new technology comes about. So
I'm asking you to be like a Nostradamus sort of character.
Yeah, always fun to predict the future. I think that from our point of view, certainly what we're playing around with in Metaverse is more of these live events. And actually, when I say live events, it doesn't sound as exciting as it probably should do. And I mean more of these massively interactive live events where you've got lots of people coming together in one space online that you couldn't do, physically in real life, and everyone being able to interact in that space and sharing that experience, and even being the main person in that experience. A lot of things that what we're doing, you said at the start, was Rakesh, was with our Metaverse Gaming League around, sort of democratizing esports, but making it so that anyone online can actually be the player and be the winner, in a lot of these instances. So we're really interested, obviously in entertainment and shared experiences. And I think that the reason for that is that I think that that's the mass appeal which will get the most people interested in Metaverse. And I think that we're already seeing that on platforms like Roblox in gaming. And when we say platforms like Roblox, it's not necessarily a pure gaming platform. A lot of the time, these experiences are simply shared worlds that people are just interacting within. So I think for me, the killer apps are a mixture of social and entertainment, and ideally combining those two things together. And really in the same way you might do in real life, trying to, as Rev was saying, a lot of this is moving the physical to the digital. And, just like you might go to a pub or a bar and huddle around a pool table and there might be a game going on, you're there to socialize and chat with your friends. And I think a lot of this, creating these experiences and getting enough people in there to share those experiences is for me is the killer app. And I think that, games have been doing it for years now. And I think that the term gaming now is just so much broader than what we used to think of it. Most of these experiences don't really look like games. And I think that combining elements of play, interaction with a live show, for me, is going to be huge. And I think we've seen elements of that already with things like, in the Web 2 world, like Rivals Peak, where you've got an actual interaction and ability to influence a show. I think entertainment will always be interesting, but I was super interested in what Rev was saying around, this recreating physical models in the digital world and testing things. I think that's something I don't know as much about, but sounds like it could be something that would be a huge use case in B2B. I think generally B2B ops are going to be big in Metaverse when you've got virtual simulations and the ability to test products in a virtual environment at a lower cost. I think that's going to be huge, as well as VR training and things in the virtual reality killer apps that people have been talking about for several years. What is the VR killer app? And for me, it's always been social if it ever gets there. But really, in reality, at the moment, it's very much training. Looking at companies like Walmart investing in the ability to try things without the risk of injury in VR and actually learning skills through simulation. So that's really interesting. But definitely, from our point of view, it's very much entertainment and shared experiences. But I do also think that there's, from a wider point of view and looking at kind of niche things that are popping up, DAOs are, these decentralized autonomous organizations are showing. I'm not saying it's going to be the killer app necessarily because it's more of a technology, but I think the fact that they've got these organizations, these decentralized organizations popping up and mobilizing huge amounts of cash to specific causes, for me, that's fascinating. And I think that, if we're able to get a bunch of people to raise 50 odd million to try and buy a copy of the US Constitution, I mean, who knows what else is going to be next.
David, you're one of the most famous philosophy professors in the world. I mean, can you imagine giving philosophy lectures in the metaverse?
Oh, totally. The last couple of years online, we've mostly had to give, very frequently had to give our lectures over Zoom, which is just, video conferencing and not terribly satisfactory, but better than nothing. But yeah, I've already moved towards, having some activities in the metaverse. Occasionally, I'll get together with a group of other philosophers, and we'll meet up in a virtual world space. And yeah, this way, maybe 8 or 10 of us who are around the world in UK and US and Australia can all meet up in a common location. So I think that form of communication is clearly one potential killer app here. I suspect if the pandemic had come along 4 or 5 years later, instead of it being the heyday of Zoom, it could well have been it still could well be that in a few years virtual world spaces will be dominant for this purposes. So communication, I think, is one potential killer app here, and correspondingly community. My university is not just classes and lectures, but it's a whole community. You can easily imagine universities moving online and people congregating in virtual worlds. I do think while you're talking about virtual reality, there's always a limitation here, which is this form factor, the headset. Very few people want to have one of these headsets on for a long time, maybe for a short time, but even then, you cut yourself off from physical reality. You feel a bit foolish. You typically want to lock yourself up somewhere where no one can see you. So I think this could limit the killer apps for virtual reality. On the other hand, once the augmented reality form factor comes along, when you can do things like this, but just in something much more like a set of glasses, which may give you access to the physical world, but also project virtual objects into it, then I think there's going to be a space for a whole lot more killer apps. All of a sudden, you'll be able to do much of what you can do in VR in this glasses form factor, just by dialing down the physical world and dialing up the virtual world. And furthermore, but once you have this form factor, potentially this technology will be able to replace most of our uses, say, of screens. Right now, we spend so much time interacting with, say, a smartphone screen, a desktop screen. Once you have this good enough augmented reality, we'll be able to simply project a screen into the world whenever you want to interact with it, just like that, as a virtual object. At that point, it's kind of not at all clear what use there is left for smartphones, desktop screens, and so on. So I think that's certainly one killer app, the point where augmented reality gets good enough to project screens in the world. Likewise, it'll just do so much of our data processing for us. Even recognition is another killer app. Someone like me, getting kind of old, I don't always have, maybe I run into you somewhere. What was his name again? Oh, well, okay. Well, augmented reality is going to, in principle, have the capacity to run some recognition software and recognize my old friends for me and offload so many of the capacities of my mind. So, I suspect we're talking more like 10 to 20 years in the future to have that augmented reality technology really widespread. But I think that's where this is going. And at that point, I think it truly becomes transformative.
I'd just like to say I would love that as a feature of being able to have a name pop up above someone's head when I'm speaking to them, just to remember the name. That'd be amazing.
I could use that.
Rev, the killer apps and business models which are likely to succeed in your view?
Yeah, first, I'd like to say that I think it's kind of unfortunate that the term virtual reality has become synonymous with these things we put on our head to experience it. For me, the virtual reality is that world that we're sharing. That just happens to be one mode of experiencing it. It's a particular display device. You experience virtual reality every time you play a 3D video game. You just are experiencing it through a window, and it's less immersive. At some point in the future, we may have a direct neural link that supersedes any of this clunky stuff on our head, and you can have a far more immersive experience. And I believe it'll still be a virtual reality then, even without the HMD thing. If you were to ask, so here we are, we're older people, some younger than others. I'm guessing Andrew's much younger than us, but this question about, when will virtual reality happen and what's the killer app for it? I think that only makes sense for our generation or kind of the older people. If you go talk to any teenager today, I have two teenage boys. They live in virtual reality every day, and they get on Minecraft and the other games they're in, not to play. Mostly it's just to go hang out with their friends. And that's been the case for them since essentially they were born. I mean, they're citizens of this metaverse thing to start with. To them, the question of when will it happen is a nonsensical one. Like they're already there. And what we're doing is evolving it so that these experiences are richer and more immersive and more, bring more functions and stuff to us. But the killer app is already here. It's gaming. That's where everything starts in technology. If you look at pretty much everything we talk about today as being like the future of technology, whether it's communications, with voice over IP and video conferencing, digital currencies, social media, all of these things had their origins in video games because young people tend to be more open to trying new things. And those that are attracted to video games are technologists and technology enthusiasts. So it's kind of a petri dish where we get to go see these things play out and evolve. So if you want to see the future, I recommend taking a look at what's going on in gaming at any given point. That's going to be our whole life, because these kids grow up and eventually they enter the workforce, and that's how they're going to socialize and work with each other. So we kind of know what the future looks like. What we don't know is specifically what are at what point the various physical technologies like these HMDs and glasses we're gonna have the right breakthroughs at the right time, and we're gonna get common acceptance of them. It'll happen eventually, sometime between now and 30 years from now. We just don't know the exact points of those. But the question's kind of moot. Virtual reality is here. We have billions of people playing games in 3D worlds, and they're growing up, and they're going to be working in these 3D worlds as well.
Just on this terminological point, I find it useful to draw a distinction between virtual reality, which is the full-scale immersive thing all around you, maybe with a headset, and virtual worlds, on the other hand, which have been here for years. Your average video game on a desktop involves a 3D world on a 2D screen, and people don't like calling that virtual reality, but yeah, virtual worlds is a thing which is already here, which every kid is doing every day. And virtual reality is a thing which is coming.
I know that's what people call it. It just, to the people playing those video games, they feel like they're in a reality. I know I've been one of those. I played World of Warcraft for many, many years, formed lots of friendships, and spent hours in there defeating monsters, spending weeks and weeks banging your head against a boss kill. And for me, it was reality. And I believe that's what it feels like to the children that are in there. It is a reality to them. It's a terminology issue. And I think this is where we might see a generational difference, in the coming years here. We're having a problem with the older generation kind of communicating with these younger kids.
It's a good point though, because you don't necessarily see the young users on Fortnite, Roblox, and Minecraft going, what is the metaverse? It doesn't matter. Like it doesn't really matter whether it's decentralized or centralized. Them, they're socializing in, like you say, virtual worlds, virtual reality, whatever you want to call it, and that's where they're spending their time. We used to be.
It's irrelevant what it's called. They're just doing it.
Exactly. And spending money doing it.
Do they have their own, Andrew? Do the kids have their own words for these things, or are they just say, okay, well, it's Roblox?
Well, we live in the meathead world. For them it doesn't really matter, and I think that we've over the pandemic we've really scaled we've had a lot of Roblox developers that have been on the platform for 10 years. To them, they've grown up on these platforms, as Red was saying. They've grown up with being able to jump on a server and play a game and chat together. Maybe the game doesn't really matter. They're just chatting and they're hanging out. And I think that
even more interesting is Minecraft, where there isn't really even a game from the very start. You just jump in there and start building a world with your friends and hang out. And the games that are on the Minecraft platforms were created by the people in it. It's by the users themselves. And my children, they played it when they were young. They stopped playing Minecraft when they got a little bit older, and now they're back. They're hanging out in Minecraft as teenagers, 16 years old and 14, which used to be considered a game for little children. But that's where they go hang out with their friends, and they create their own sports inside there, their own.
Let's stick with the kids. These kids are eventually going to grow up and get jobs. What kind of jobs will be created by the metaverse, either in the metaverse or to build and create the metaverse? What sort of jobs can these kids look forward to or aspire to getting? Andrew?
I think, in a way,
you guys are hiring right now. I understand.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these kids. It used to be, maybe 5-10 years ago, or maybe less than that. It was. I want to be a YouTube influencer. Now it's, a lot of these young people. And I don't like. I'm trying to steer away from using the term kids because it's growing. Over 50% of Roblox users are over 13. These platforms are aging up. But I think now a lot of the young people we hire that have grown up building games for their friends and building experiences on Roblox, they want to be the best developers. They want to make their own virtual world or their own games. They aspire to be to own or build a game that has been played by millions of players. And the great thing is that on platforms like Roblox and Minecraft, to a certain extent, it's easy to do that in a way that you've got the tools. Roblox gives you the tools. There's no server costs involved. They give you everything you need to make your own experience, and they give you the platform to do it. So, we work with a lot of younger developers in our team. We've hired probably 30 to 40 now, in our Roblox studio, and these young people are experts. And what we like to do is pair them with more traditional Unity and Unreal, game developers, and bring those resources together. But the overriding impact of that is that these young people want to create, just like you might have wanted to when I was younger, wanted to be a movie star or a pro sports player. Now I want to either be it's where people spend their time. I want to be the person that made that game, or I want to be the person that's the best at that game. So a lot around gaming, and I think that this term gaming is just broadening as the years go by, because as Rev quite rightly points out, you go into some of these Minecraft and Roblox experiences, and they don't look like games in a traditional sense. It's more of an Animal Crossing style, or the biggest game on Roblox, which has probably had now about 30 billion plays, is a game where you build your own house, and it's a social experience rather than a playing with a direct goal, or in traditional gaming. So they really are becoming more social experience builders. And I think that because of these platforms emerging like Roblox that leverage UGC, and YouTube, which traditionally has leveraged UGC, and this whole Web 2 creator economy, I think now young people realize that anyone can do that. I know people through friends that are doing that, so it becomes a lot more achievable. Whereas becoming a movie star or a pro sports person, it's a smaller silo. And I think that generally it's I want to be a game developer these days.
Rev, working at Nvidia is a bit like winning the first prize in the lottery of life. So what sort of jobs are you thinking of? What sort of jobs will Nvidia be developing in the next 3 to 5 years?
So the way we look at it, if you think about the metaverse as this extension of the internet, where we've created a 3D space, that a set of spaces that people can occupy, something more like the real world, I believe that there's going to be a lot of jobs to create things that are like the real world, but inside this space. With the creation of the web, I think the key for it really expanding to what it was that it was relatively easy for anyone to create a web page. Anyone could go create a website. If if we were limited to only a small number of elites creating the web pages, that only a certain number of companies that have the resources could do that, I don't think we would have seen the growth of the internet and the web to where it is today. I think that's pretty clear to most people. But creating 3D worlds is extremely difficult. The set of people in the world that know how to do this and do it at a high level of fidelity is limited to basically just the visual effects and CG animated movie industry and games. If you were to total up all of the artists and designers who know how to do that stuff, it's still pretty small. But we're seeing platforms like Roblox and Minecraft democratize the 3D content creation for others. What we would like to do at Nvidia and what we're doing with Omniverse is taking the combination of the amazing extreme amounts of compute we can create with our computers, with physics simulation and artificial intelligence, to potentially democratize this content creation. Make it so that we can go from the intent of someone who wants to create something into that design without knowing all of the gory details on how to build that thing, the craftsmanship it takes to build a model for a visual effects movie, for Avengers Endgame or a Pixar film. That's decades of experience, and we just can't scale otherwise. So we're doing that on the one hand, and I think once we have that, all of the traditional skills that we have in the real world, like architecture, like urban planning, and parks, creating parks, all of these things are now relevant. And the amount of these things we can create is going to be effectively infinite because they're all virtual. And so the jobs for designers who can use these tools and really think about how the interactions of people and communities inside these shared spaces in the virtual world work, I think that's nearly an endless need. And so I imagine 10, 20 years from now, we're going to see the biggest job market is going to be designers, people designing the spaces and the things that we enjoy inside these virtual worlds.
Okay, we only have a few minutes left, so I guess a final question from me. Metaverse environments are obviously going to be extremely data-rich environments, and I suppose the final question has to be on privacy and how potentially data from avatars and people interacting in these environments will be managed. So what would be the best way to manage data in these metaverse environments? David?
Yeah, I mean, these issues here are so difficult. These virtual worlds, whoever creates a virtual world is basically, in principle, all powerful and all knowing with respect to that virtual world. I've likened this to, the traditional concept of a god who creates a world, is omniscient, they can know anything, and they're omnipotent. They can do anything within that virtual world. And yeah, each of those corresponds to amazing potential, but also amazing, also huge potential dangers. When the corporations are creating your virtual world, then basically corporations are not going to be in a position to know everything about what's going on, to manipulate what's going on. So yeah, issues like privacy on the one hand and manipulation on the other hand, which have already been very huge in social media, as far as I can tell, are just likely to get even more serious as we go to the creation of full-scale virtual worlds. And it's not as if, especially while corporations are doing it, they're going to have that responsibility it's not as if the corporations can, on the other hand, can totally give up on control and manipulation of what's going on in those worlds too, because they, bad things happen. If they just say, well, let's just have free reign here, and we're not going to monitor it, then you get the flip side of this, which is, what's happened with Facebook and all kinds of serious consequences for not controlling communities.
Andrew,
so
Andrew, how do you manage data from the games you produce and develop?
Well, a lot of it, specifically talking about Roblox, where a lot of the audience is, 200 million users on there, where we're making games for, that is very much controlled by Roblox as a Web2 platform. So they, as a public company, are extremely set up on safety and protecting PII. Thousands of human moderators and various different, AI to protect. Not only user data, but to protect the users from chat, bad actors, that kind of thing. So,
but who owns that data, Andrew? Who owns that data?
So this is the thing. So it's it's Roblox that ends up owning the data, but they're very limited in what data they collect. When you sign up for a Roblox account, you are encouraged not to give your real name. You are encouraged to give your age, so they can set certain standards for that. But there's very little data collected on a platform like Roblox. There's obviously and also very little data available to developers as part of that. So I think that when it comes to avatar data being managed, on a platform like Roblox, it's perfectly safe, because perfectly safe is a bad turn of phrase, but it's very safe. But if you're looking at more of talking broadly about the metaverse and Web3 and openness and decentralization, I think there's a lot of questions around that, and there's a big theme in the Web3 community around pseudonymity, around hiding people's who they are. And recently, just last week, the founders of an NFT company got doxxed. Their identities revealed, and I think there's a lot of debate and conversation around that when it comes to the Web3 part. But certainly on Roblox, you can only point to the company and for example, Facebook, these Web2 companies that own the data. But there are protocols and technologies in place to allow for things like zero knowledge proof, so that we don't have to reveal all of our data without verifying. So there are ways around it with Web3 offerings as well. And I think there's lots of innovation to be had around data and ownership of that data in Web3. But the best I've seen is this zero knowledge proof consensus, which just allows us to share information without revealing everything. And I think that's what we want in our data, just to be able to choose what we reveal.
And Rev, final word, data and privacy?
Yeah, I think there's two sides to that problem. One is that how do we the technology behind maintaining privacy and ownership of your data? And then there's the social, economic, business, political part of all of that. I think the technology side we can solve. I think given enough engineers and people who care about this problem, we can solve it. And that'll be, using various forms of cryptography, blockchains, whatever we ends up being the thing that solves that. The bigger issue is all the other stuff. There's a lot of incentives for entities not necessarily working in good faith to collect all of this data. And I think we were surprised over the last years at how much data has been collected and what's being done with that. Collectively, the world of users on the internet were naive. We assumed that it was less data. We didn't really think about the ramifications of it, and we thought that the actors collecting this data were not doing things that were as bad as they sometimes end up being. I'm hopeful that now that we're not as naive, people are waking up to what privacy means and what the superpowers, godlike powers, people who own these platforms have, that we'll end up coming up with a solution on the social, political, economic spectrum of this. I don't know what that's going to look like. That's the really hard stuff. We can talk about technology all we want, but that technology won't get implemented unless there's a will by all of the actors. And we've started seeing steps towards that, right? Years ago, Europe introduced the GDPR thing, and so now that's spread everywhere. You have to accept them websites that try to put tracking cookies and stuff on you because of these laws that are in place. And this time we see it coming. The first time the internet came into being, governments, people in general, citizens didn't really know what it was. So we had no chance at imagining all of the things we might need to control a little bit to save ourselves. But this time, I think we will. We'll do a better job.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you'll agree, we've had a fascinating panel discussion today, but unfortunately, we're out of time. So in closing, I would like to thank our panelists, Rev Leberidian from Nvidia, David Chalmers, author of Reality Plus, Andrew Douthwaite from Doobit. And that's it for today. If you've enjoyed this event, please don't forget to subscribe to the CODEX YouTube channel. Click the subscribe button at the bottom right of the screen and the bell icon, and this will ensure you never miss an event on CODEX TV. Thanks for watching, and do join us again for our next event, which will look at how tech could potentially cool the planet. That will take place on Wednesday, the 16th of March. Until then, please enjoy the rest of your day.